Hello everybody, welcome to my channel, Astro Pillars Astrology. We're going to talk Chiron today. I'm choosing to talk about Chiron as a follow-up talk I did on my Instagram. I did Instagram Live on astrology and addictions, but I just want to pay my dues to Chiron because I think it's a very interesting point in an astrology chart, and it's definitely worthy of knowing the placement of where Chiron sits in your natal chart and areas where it's transiting. So I choose today to do a presentation on this, and I've got some overheads on this. So we're going to just delve into the Chiron, the wounded healer, the archetype of healing, all this kind of thing that Chiron represents. So let's just kick it off with the discovery of Chiron, because it was recently discovered in 1977, and it's interesting, we're coming up to 2027 in a few years, which is going to be the return of Chiron. And we'll talk a little bit about this later on, but I think it's a really important time in one's life, the Chiron return. But Chiron was discovered by Charles Cowell, an astronomer at Hales Observatory, and he discovered this in 1977. And I think a few weeks prior to that, he saw a peculiar object floating in the sky in the solar system, and he was taking photos, and it was around in obviously the constellation of Aries, because we know, or most astrologers know, that Chiron tends to sit a lot longer in the sign of Aries. But so, and this was around Samhain, actually, around that time he was taking these pictures, and obviously he noticed a faint object orbiting near the sun. And I think there was another guy, Richard Grebe of California Institute, took a few more photos and confirmed the existence of this body revolving around the sun. And then at this time, they announced Chiron to the world, which was a phenomenal thing, and particularly for astrologers. Astrologers were very, very interested in this. And I guess some people will call Chiron a comet, or, a planetoid. Its archetypal influence has been becoming more conscious to astronomers and astrologers, and who are playing out and sussing out, okay, what is really the nature of Chiron's behavior. And comets generally, from particularly mundane astrology, have always been indications of an ill omen, and so this is important to understand, because comets and meteors, things like this, were omens of, war, famine, and catastrophe, disaster, so to speak. But so, comets usually come from beyond our solar system, or at least beyond the point of Saturn. And Chiron's appearance symbolizes the awareness of a greater message, I'd say, from beyond. And it's a really interesting, that the Chiron would be considered the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, and the process of individuation, which is really important. And I think Chiron plays a really key role in understanding this from an archetypal point of view as well. But so the mythological Chiron was a centaur healer, unable generally to, just a quick note on this, unable to cure and heal his own wound. So his discovery reminds us, or discovery of Chiron, is a potential catastrophe for the human herd if we cannot attend and heal our own personal wound, our wound in the collective and the earth, and our own personal wounds, right? So there's a saying, I just remember reading Robert Bly's great book called Iron John, and there was a specific, if I remember correctly, I just remember this, one of the key things is you don't become, it's all about, this book is about initiating men into masculinity and understanding these rites of passage and this kind of thing. And he did state, which really stuck with me, that you can't really become a human unless you have experienced a wound of some kind. And I think really Chiron carries this metaphor for us. So I've drawn up here the chart of Chiron in its discovery, because I think it's important, because it's interesting how there's a Sag rising, and Sag rising is always linked obviously to the centaurs, and Chiron is expressing itself. And for those who don't know, I got my cursor here, this is Chiron here here, and it's sitting in the sign at 3 degrees of Taurus. It's actually retrograde. And here is the ascendant point here. This is Sagittarius. So the chart for the discovery of Chiron has the lord of the chart, which is kind of Jupiter if you want to look at it that way, but the ruling sign is Sag, and here he's sitting there in Taurus, in Earth. And the Earth sign really is an indication of abundant resources. Taurus is the sign of physical senses, pleasures and things like this. And I think his placement in the chart reminds us of the human wound we instinctually feel on our sensual and sexual sides of things. So, and firstly, I forgot to mention actually in the beginning, so I just want to call out a shout out to my teacher, Brian Clark, because I'm using primarily his notes on Chiron, and they're phenomenal. So I just wanted to shout out, so make sure people understand, just acknowledging my sources. Brian Clark, who's from Astrosynthesis, so I'm using his notes here on Chiron. But anyway, so getting back to this wounding, and it's in the 4th house, so to speak. But I think that this wounding we experience is the 4th house is about home, and there's a theme in Chiron, and I'm not going to talk about the aspects, but particularly this wounding and really not feeling at home, or a sense of belonging somewhere. And this will come up more prevalent as I go through this, because this wound is can play out in a number of ways, particularly when we understand the myth of Chiron a little bit more. But just on a note on Chiron, so Chiron was like other centaurs, but he made his home in the mountains, right? So Chiron's lived in a cave known as Chironian, was on Mount Pelion. And he practiced the gifts of herbalism, healing, and soon became known for his skills as surgery and medicine. Right? And he also became a mentor for many solar heroes, training him in the arts of warrior, wisdom, healing, herbalism, astrology, prophecy, hunting, and riding. So his cave was described as being on the dark side of Zeus's mountain, serving as a link to what lies beyond Zeus's vision. So Zeus in the Sag side as the centaur represents the vision. But we can see that, the cave, or the entrance to the cave, as we're going to talk about here, is often said the caves is one of the entrances to the underworld, the gateway to instinctual life. So there's a really underworld kind of passage and cycle connected to Chiron. Jupiter rules the signs of the centaur, and it reminds us of an internal instinctual wound that underlies the upward mobility of intuition. Because I think Sag has a strong link to intuition, and like I've said in many of my talks before, the arrow or the archer firing off that arrow to the center of the universe and honing is in our vision, having that vision and will to set goals and to be able to create all these kind of things, which is a very Jupiterian type aspect to this. But there is a strong link to the centaurs and Sagittarius. So Chiron's wound, right? So there's a few different versions of this. But the central image of the wounding of Chiron, and most agree it was Hercules, the pupil and friend of Chiron, who unwittingly injured his mentor, Chiron. So Chiron was accidentally wounded in the leg by one of Hercules' stray arrows. So the wound is in the leg, the animal part of Chiron. And it reminds us of a wounded instinctual life. However, it also is part of that supports and mobilizes us, the divine half, so to speak. So depending on the story of the wound, it may be located in the thigh, the knee, or the ankle, ruled by Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and other planets, which Chiron orbits. So, I mean, in medical astrology, right, Jupiter rules the thighs and the hips, Saturn is the knees, and Uranus is like the Achilles heel or the ankle. So Chiron orbits between here. It has a very a different kind of eccentric orbit compared to, say, other planets. So the part of Chiron that touches the Earth is injured, right? And the arrow tip contains the poisonous blood of Hydra, for which there is no antidote. So I personally think the poisonous blood from Hydra, who is in the myth, the goddess, or one of the so-called water snakes, the poisonous wound is connected to our unconscious, which I think we forever have to dig into and discover really what that is to become so-called holistic and whole. And I think that is a really ongoing process of individuation, which is a strong link to this Chironic theme, which we'll find out soon. And just a few notes on centaurs, because the image of a centaur seems to be expressed by the early Greeks. The awe of which the horse riding tribes were held by those who had not yet learned to domesticated horses. So wild horses were considered pretty much in awe to the ancients. But centaurs have been known as the magnetes, meaning the great ones, right? So the Hellenic myth made by centaurs was the wild, shaggy, archaic people always battling with the Lapiths, which were an ancient Greek, I think, Aeolian tribe of natives of Thessaly. And they used to kind of, rub up against these tribes, the centaurs did. But the centaurs were also accounted as great wizards and shapeshifters and the fountainheads of occult lore. Right, so there's all these kind of aspects to Chiron, which is just amazing when we'll peel off a few more layers around this. But yeah, so really interesting how they're considered shapeshifters and the fountainheads of occult lore. So really hidden knowledge, which I think a lot of points in Chiron's chart will indicate where people have the potential to find hidden wisdom within themselves. And so centaurs are generally wild and unpredictable, barbaric, brandishing tree trunks, boulders, and firebrands as their weapons. They inhabited a threshold between primitive past and the civilizing present. So centaurs were creatures that lived on the margins, like foreign to the city, creatures at boundaries of difference. So on the outskirts, right? Not really feeling like they belonged in a civilized part of the world. So they were hybrids, instinctual, intolerant of culture and disrespectful of laws and customs. So Chiron can carry some of these centaur wildness associated with the unrefined, instinctual sides of life. This may literalize as an encounter on tap feeling, often projected onto actual individuals who can take form in wildly storming feelings in us and in our own atmosphere. And I think this is really prevalent in the world now at the moment, how we can see out in the collective how people project these wounds. You can see there's, people are projecting their pain onto others. This is one of the basics of Psychology 101, right? If we don't acknowledge the things within ourselves, we just tend to project them out onto others. This is really playing out in the world at the moment. But this wild instinct can manifest, obviously, as accidents, illness, or loss, which can bring up, obviously, the shadow of the psyche and really deep reservoirs of feelings that are extremely painful and most likely often at times throw us into deep underworld cycles. So often these untamed feelings that erupt at these times can begin to heal, although painful and destructive. So a healing crisis, so to speak. So there's all these kind of things that Chiron will go through, and there is a specific things that I'm going to talk about now, which is the split between the body and the spirit. So Chiron was discovered during Samhain, and the image of Chiron is half man, half horse. We see the Chironic struggle between earthy side of self and the visionary side of self. The image of Chiron can be joined midriff. Also, interestingly, since its sexual organs are in the place of the animal region. So we're talking the instinctual side of Chiron here. And I think a lot of my motto is a lot of things I've been thinking about Chiron are deeply connected to what Wilhelm Reich was talking about when he was talking about organ sexuality, this kind of things, and how it needs to be expressed in a healthy, coherent way that makes our bodies healthy and our psyches healthy. And I think that the Chironic struggle can be in our struggle with this, and because of obviously years and years and years of ancestral attack at this level of our deep instincts and drives. So Chiron symbolizes a literal struggling, embracing and honoring our sexuality. It often feels that we need to rescue our bodily image and sexuality away from familiar or cultural images of denial and denigration. So depending on the placement, it suggests where we may encounter wounds that enforce reconciliation between limited earthbound attitudes and aspects of self that inspire us towards the divine. So there's also a connection between separation and loss of heritage, and so Chiron in our charts may suggest that wound is part of our heritage. And there's always the themes of literal separation, adoption, fostering, are often a way we may experience this in a sense of disruption of inherited model connections. Particularly people who may have a Chiron moon and a sun. I've seen this plenty of times in terms of adoption and fostering. The sense of loss or separation often leads to feelings of being an outsider or not belonging. And I think, one of the most profound themes of Chiron, and particularly if it sits on, say, a south node or on the angles of the chart, particularly on the ascendant, the IC, or any of those critical points, we feel like we don't belong on those angles in the birth natal chart. So, as just an example, Chiron in Sagittarius may have suffered due to inherent denial of religion's belief or philosophical basis. So I'm going to go through the Chiron and the signs at the end. But yeah, so there is this suffering that's due to the sign it potentially is and the placement of the house as well. So like the story of Chiron or our Chironic placements may refer to a wound caused by parental rejection and innate aspects of self. So we've got to remember in the myth, Chiron was rejected by his mother and parents. And this can be a really, really prominent theme that actually does play out in people's lives. The wound that never heals. So this is one of the main things that Chiron really reveals to us, because we never really we don't get over a Chironic wound, but we use it to our advantage. So if we are educated, initiated in a healthy way into masculinity and femininity and what it actually entails, and we're honoring our sovereign self and understand what it becomes to be a true authentic being, even though we may experience this wound, which we all do, because no one gets away with it scot-free, but we learn how to master it within ourselves, to be able to, if we're brought up in a healthy way and doing our inner homework and things like this, then we can learn how to become a teacher of this particular area or a mentor, and to help other people grow from this. So our sense of wounding are major themes to the Chironic myth. So the placement of Chiron in the horoscope helps symbolize this placement. Where we are constantly vulnerable. It is a point that's extremely vulnerable. I mean, and Saturn in the chart can be that as well, but I think Chiron really takes it to another level. And it really does. So while we may generalize the wound or split between mortal and the divine, it's unique in every case, right? So like I was saying before, Chiron helps identify the area of the wound, which is the house in astrology, like first, second, third house, that's the area. The nature of the wound is expressed through the sign. Now in this talk at the end, I go through the signs. I'm going to do a separate talk on Chiron through the houses. But I just don't want to make the talk too long. Otherwise it'll just go on forever, and I don't know, I don't think people's attention spans are that fried, but I chose to do this on here because I think it's a much better platform. So the wounds remind us of our own mortality and vulnerability. So ironically, we need to return to this source of the wound to regain a sense of wholeness. So returning to this place may reactivate the wound. However, reactivation allows the wound now to be a source of healing. Now, and this really comes up in the Chiron return, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the process of individuation, I think this is really what is the whole point of being here, because we get caught up in collective group consciousness, this kind of thing. And I think Chiron's placement between Saturn and Uranus symbolizes the journey towards the self. And Chiron is the bridge point between Saturn and Uranus. So Saturn's all about boundaries, being on the planet, grounded in reality. It can be a little bit cold and detached, and it likes not really progressing so much. It likes being held back. And so Chiron's in this bridge right between, because when I look at the planets, right, I think the planet Saturn is actually really important, because when we look at it's the last planet between Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, planets that represent the unconscious, and Saturn's like the gateway, right? Or it's got the rings of Saturn, which is considered boundaries, but it is the seat of I think we're here on Earth. Saturn represents Earth. It's Earth element. So we're here, like the Black Sabbath album, to master reality, because Saturn is the reality principle, right? So, and I think being on this planet is the initiation. And then Chiron is giving us this opportunity to be able to really master the here and now with this instinctual wound we all receive, and then is creating that bridge to head to Uranus, which is Uranus rules individuation, in my opinion, because both these two planets actually represent Aquarius. And it's interesting, Pluto's in Aquarius at the moment as I'm doing this talk. But so the individuation, so we're going from the crowd, the collective, Saturn, follow the rules and regulations that everyone's doing, to getting thrown into Uranus and going, hang on a minute, you're out on your own, become an authentic self. Go create yourself. Which is, I think, this clinically I see a lot of people with anxiety, and I think they're really struggling with this. This generates a lot of anxiety, moving from that Saturnian realm to the Uranian realm. But Chiron is here to assist us with this. We carry this wound that keeps us tied here to the earth. And it's interesting how which I think Chiron being discovered in Taurus is all about. So we're here, we're tied here, but we need to go through this wounding that helps us individuate to become actually our full potential and actually who we are, to think in our own terms, not to be fed and mind controlled by what the collective is trying to teach us from reality. But I think the planet Saturn is the initiation point, because we need to be here on this planet to master reality before we can move over to this Uranian side of things that can take us into this process of individuation and becoming our true authentic selves, if you call this. I mean, in Taoism, in Chinese medicine, because I'm a Chinese medical practitioner, they talk about this. It's really resides, the process of that is a lot to do with the heart consciousness. So that's a topic for another time. But I find this Chiron bridging theme extremely important. And after acceptance of our own mortality, we can strive towards higher realms beyond the rings of Saturn, right? And this is what it's about. Uranus takes these outer planets, take us to these higher states of consciousness if we've done the authentic work that Saturn requires, which is putting in time, discipline, to understand ourselves as best we can. And then we get, so if you want to call it, rewarded the prize of individuation, which I think is a great reward, but extremely painful and not an easy task to bring to, an easy task to do, while we're in this Saturnian realm, the planet Earth. So transits of Chirons, or transits to Chiron, often accompany an awakening to a new way of an important transition into a greater acceptance of self. So this pain, this wound, as much as it can throw us off kilter and really take us into the abyss, has that ability to, once we've processed it and really honor it and, really get right into the psychological aspects of it, allows us to really accept ourselves and into greater acceptance of ourselves, which is really powerful. So even though this transition is obviously painful and difficult, it's what they call the healing crisis, or the shaman's calling. There's a lot of, everyone wants to be a shaman now or whatever, but I'm talking, I guess, we all go through that process. Who was the psychologist? Rollo May said, you don't grow human painlessly, or you don't become a human painlessly. We need the pain, we need the wound to become human and really understand ourselves and the world at large. So the step beyond the world of form and structure, which is Saturn, awakens a greater story. And Chiron is the link between that. Chiron's a link between the Saturn and that Uranian side of things, which we all need to individuate and head to. Because ultimately, this wound, not only when we heal our own wounds, this heals the whole collective, and then that wound opens us up to a greater sense of reality. And I mean, who knows where that can head to? Well, I don't think we're anywhere near it, but there's a lot of people doing the authentic work, trying their best, and it's not an easy task at all. It's a heroic task, and that's becoming few and far between these days, the act of heroism. But anyway, the interconnection between wounding and healing. So Chiron reminds us of the interrelationship between wounding and healing, and how both are necessary for the journey towards wholeness. It also represents that which we are often able to provide others, which remains denied to ourselves. So this heroic struggle to heal. And when you've seen real, and I do see this because I'm a practitioner and I have a lot of very, sick patients, as well as others just really struggling in underworld cycles from the astrological transits and things they're going through. And it is a heroic struggle to heal. And I guess that's like that saying the ancient Greeks have, when illness is divine. Because if we don't get that wound, or whatever that wound represents, or that illness, then there's a part of us that that when the Greeks have that saying, when illness is divine, we would never go to those levels of consciousness if we didn't have that health crisis or that underworld cycle we've been pulled into from an emotional trauma of some kind. And this is the journey towards wholeness. And Chiron's part of that journey. I think Chiron really is in the point in the chart which will really take us there. So he's a mentor to the solar heroes as well. And in us represents his heroic struggle to heal others and ourselves, which demands personal and psychological sacrifices. Wow, yeah, and it does. It's interesting how I'm doing this talk actually, right? I'm nearly 50, so my Chiron return's coming up, and I've chosen to talk about this, and I've been reading this, my notes from Brian actually, and thinking, wow, because I think his note's actually the best I've ever come across on Chiron. So Chiron reminds us of the need to be heroic in the face of seemingly endless trials. So Hercules was a student of Chiron. He was also responsible for Chiron's woundedness. So here the hero may symbolize the ego, and that is often unintentionally opens up the wound and by itself is helpless to cure it. Because Chiron could not heal this wound from the poisoned arrow. So Chiron is a guide to self-healing, because ultimately healing comes from within, and you can come across great mentors and healers, but ultimately the work is always on us. So Chiron's role as a mentor guides us into experiences or ways of being, and ideas may change the course and content of our lives. So one of the key words used for Chiron was the maverick, due to its eccentricity of orbit. And the word maverick refers to cow or steer not having a brand, nor being branded. So the word derives from Samuel Maverick, who was a cattle owner who did not brand his cattle, or his herd. So a Chironian often feels like a maverick, not branded to the family, tribal culture they are raised in. They don't feel like they belong. Many people I've done charts for, younger kids who've got these Chirons on the ascendant, on the IC, and even on the midheaven, they just don't feel like they really want to be here. This is why Chiron signifies those feelings of alienation, foreign and unwelcome. And Chiron literally rules refugees, migrants, or living in another culture, unlike people living in another culture, unlike their own heritage. So, and like I mentioned before, the Chiron return, right, around the age of 50. It's going to be different for everyone. But it's around this time, and a lot of people do have, this allows us 50 an opportunity to integrate our unlived instincts, can now be acknowledged, mourned, or let go. It can also be an experience, or whatever it was where we felt a wound when we were younger, can really resurface at this time. And probably because, at the time of 50, right, you're not young anymore. You're not old, but you know that the time is closing in round connected to your own mortality. So there's potentially the return of Chiron frees the spirit while redeeming the wound, allowing us to live in more accordance with the soulful aspects of our lives. And many, many people have healing crises around this time, or health issues, I've noticed clinically. It doesn't always have to be like that. It doesn't have to be a physical health thing. It can be something that comes up within their own psyches that they really need to deal with. So the Chiron return, which I just mentioned, and also the keys concepts of Chiron, just to summarize, is Chiron is really the maverick, the tribal outsider, the healer, the mentor, the shaman. The wound that cannot be healed, the wounded healer. And people can often experience feelings of exile, alienation, separateness, and loneliness or loss of tribe. not belong here. And I think people who are really living on their own terms authentically are always going to feel branded as the maverick, the tribal outsider. And I think more people are noticing this more than ever now because of what's really happened in the last 4 years and not being accepted within families and workplaces of work. And yeah, not really feeling like they feel in, if you can see what's really going on, then, you feel like a complete and utter outsider. Sometimes you can feel lonely because you feel like no one else can see what's going on. So now I'm just going to talk just briefly about Chiron in the signs of the zodiac. And I'm going to do a separate video, like I said, on... And there's a few other things on Chiron I want to get into. But Chiron in Aries is one of the most common ones because Chiron tends to be in this sign for a long time. And the wounding can be through internalizing anger, resentment, because Aries is cardinal fire. People can be, it's the masculine principle, so there can be a wounding around the masculine principle within ourselves, or it's connected to our instincts. It can be a violent sign as well, Aries, so there can be wounding, can be connected to violence. And also I think a really big one for this is the wounding holding back from adventures and not willing to take risks. This can be a big thing for Chiron in Aries. For the Aryan type, it really is the masculine principle. Too scared to take a risk, take a chance, and it can be harder to express our masculinity in this sign. But house placement, of course, is we need to take in consideration as well. So these are a few basics of this Chiron theme in signs. Chiron in Taurus, because the Taurus is deeply linked to the senses and sensuality. So there can be, firstly, wounds. Venus rules is ruled by Venus, so wounds to our own self-esteem, lack of value to the self, not feeling like we're worthy of material. Wounds to our stability with material security can be fine. Wounds of feeling valued and not accepted by others. And we can have wounds because Taurus is quite a hedonistic sign. We can have wounds to do with hedonistic excesses, excessive sex, excessive eating, excessive materialism. Wounding us in various shapes or forms. We've got Chiron in Gemini. Wounds through sibling rivalry, because remember, Gemini is the connection to the sibling. Wounds through our cognitive function, speech. Not feeling we're intelligent enough to express ourselves verbally. Yeah, hard to speak, hard to find a voice. The wounding can be around can't string a sentence together at the moment. Eccentric thinking. Feeling our thoughts aren't valued by the collective or the herd. Wounds in relation to siblings, like I said, learning and communications, and feelings of alienation to do with the siblings. Chiron in Cancer. Wounds in nurturing and caring ourselves, because of course Cancer is the sign of maternity, sensitivity, not being able to express feelings comfortably. Wounds from ancestry and family dynamics, because broken homes, pain related to race and ancestry, like it said before. So there's all these family dynamics to do with the Chiron in Cancer. Chiron in Leo is like wounds to self-esteem and lack of confidence. Withdrawal from self, scared of standing out, sensitive to the approval of others. Lack of ego, right? can be very egoless. I mean, you could be a Leo sun and then have a Chiron in Leo, and people, you can be the dead opposite of it, right? Lack of ego. And wounds to the creative principle, children, because Leo rules children. Chiron in Virgo. So suffering. Wounds associated with health, because Virgo is generally the health sign. I've seen this a lot in certain people, obviously because I'm a clinician, but suffering from perfectionism. Not feeling everything we do is good enough. And this is a big one for the Chiron in Virgo. Neurosis from overthinking. Yep. Overthinking. And, it can be wounds to do with health, a lot to do with hygiene. I'd probably throw in psychological hygiene in that one. But suffering from perfectionism, the Virgos can be an extremely neurotic sign I've seen in difficult angles to Chiron and all that kind of thing in Virgo, so the Chiron in Libra, so wounds in relation and compromising too much. Wounding of the feminine principle. Losing identity in another, because Librans is always about seeing both sides of things, and it's very easy to lose our identities from living just for another person, because Libra's always the sign, remember, like Aquarius, you always need someone else on these relationships. So wounds from marriage, superficial relations. Librans can be extremely superficial. May have lack of good coupling or relationship imageries that are positive to enhance a good relationship. A Chiron in Scorpio. Wounding from not speaking the truth. Not addressing deeper issues from secrets not being told. Wounds from sex scandals and abuse. Addictions is a big one for this, actually. I've seen quite a few people recently in clinic who have ended up in rehab. This is why I did my talk on astrology and addictions, but a lot of them had Chiron in Scorpio. So wounds of loss of power, trust, psychological manipulation. May be limited by lack of early images of intimacy. It's an interesting one. The denial of death, or the denial of going beneath the surface of appearances. Scorpio's deep. So very powerful sign. A lot to do with the psyche. All the water elements, the wounding can be really a lot more intense. So Chiron in Sag, a religious wound of some kind. We could have come up in a really dogmatic family, a cult. Wounds to do with our belief systems. This is a big one, actually. Never-ending search for knowledge, feeling we never know enough. This can be a big one with Chiron in Sag or Chiron in the 9th house. I haven't talked about the houses. I'll do a different one on that. A talk on that. Wounds from foreign cultural lands. Wounding from higher education. For some reason now we've got all the degrees, but really hasn't made much difference to our lives, hasn't benefited us anyway. A wounding in inherited denial of religion, beliefs, or philosophical base to life. So maybe we grew up without any deep philosophical insight, or didn't have a chance to delve deeper into those philosophical subjects. Chiron in Sag. Chiron in Capricorn. Definitely wounding from father figures. Might as well throw in government there. Form and structure not good enough. So looking at your physical body, You can look at it on that level and go, God, I don't look good enough. I'm not good enough. Wounding in relation to authority figures. That can be parents, government as well. That's a substitute parent. And too much responsibility placed on us. So we can have these wounds from a early age of where we're just thrown into responsibility at a young age where we couldn't grow up and really have a childhood. That's a big one for Chiron in Capricorn. Chiron in Aquarius, wounding from our own individuality. Not being able to express our own authentic image of self. Wound coming from losing identity with the crowd. That's a really big one, actually. And collectively, I think we're probably going through that. Pluto's in Aquarius now, but that we can, because Aquarius is always about, this is a sign, a humanitarian sign, so it's the crowd. It rules kind of the crowd and individuation at the same time. It's a very interesting sign, Aquarius. It's a really, really unique sign, actually. Afraid of progress, wounding from afraid of progress, wanting to progress. And in another one, there can be a big disconnection from self. Yeah. Chiron in Pisces, wounding from excessive altruism. I would pin that to Aquarius as well, actually, because that can be the sign of altruistic. But I think Piscean has because it's so sensitive as a sign and compassionate, they can tend to want to, they can selfless to the point of losing the whole identity within themselves. The Pisces type can have really weak boundaries, making us prone to psychic attack. And it reminds me, actually, because there was a herb I came across here, and it was actually in Brian's notes. It was called Coronia, and it's a native of South Africa. And I think they made a bark flower remedy out of this. I'm not sure if I remember correctly when I was reading my notes, but it's to do with kind of the Chiron in Pisces type thing, when we're drained by others psychically. This psychic sensitivity is really, we can become too easily victims. It's the wounding around victimhood. That can be a Piscean thing as well, but easily under psychic attack. And I would do the Australian bush flower essence that comes to mind would be fringe violet around this one. But it's interesting how this herb was called Chironia. And so it's a native in South America. I found that really interesting. Yeah, and that was the last one, guys. So I'll wrap that up here. But I will do another one. I'm going to do a follow-up on this theme in Chiron. We'll talk about Chiron going through the 12 houses. So if you come this far, thanks for listening, and we'll be in touch for further videos. So thank you.